Welcome to Audiobook 365 Stories.
One school day was almost finished. In the classroom, the final lesson was happening, quiet and calm. It was a simple lesson about plants. The desks were messy with small, soft pieces from trees like hazel and willow, which the kids had been drawing. But outside, the sky had turned dark and there wasn't much light left to draw. Ursula stood in front of the class, asking the kids questions to help them understand the plants better. A strong beam of light shone through the window, making the kids' heads glow with a warm, reddish color. But Ursula didn't really notice it. She was busy, trying to finish up the lesson before the day ended. She asked the kids more questions to make sure they learned everything they needed to know. She stood in the shadows with the plant pieces in her hand, leaning towards the kids, focused on teaching them. Suddenly, she heard the door click, but she didn't pay much attention. Then she saw a man's face in the light near her, looking at her. It scared her a lot. She felt like she might faint. All her hidden fears came rushing back, making her feel very upset. "Did I scare you?" said Birkin, shaking hands with her. "I thought you heard me come in." "No," she said quietly, finding it hard to speak. He laughed and said sorry, which made her wonder why he found it funny. "It's so dark," he remarked. "Should we turn on the light?" And stepping aside, he flicked on the bright electric lights. The classroom looked different now, not as cozy as before. Birkin turned to Ursula with curiosity. Her eyes looked wide and puzzled, her mouth trembling a bit. She seemed like someone who had just woken up. There was a gentle beauty about her, like the soft light of dawn on her face. He felt a new joy looking at her, feeling carefree. "Are you studying catkins?" he asked, picking up a hazel twig from a student's desk. "Are they as developed as this? I didn't notice them this year." He looked closely at the hazel twig in his hand. "And the red ones too," he exclaimed, noticing the tiny red bits on the female bud. Then he walked around the desks to look at the students' books. Ursula watched him carefully. He moved quietly, making her heart calm down. She felt like she was standing aside, watching him in his own focused world. His presence was calm, like a quiet spot in the busy room. Suddenly, he looked at her, and her heart raced at the sound of his voice. "Can you give them some crayons?" he asked. "So they can color the female flowers red and the male ones yellow." "I'd like them to use plain chalk, just red and yellow. The details aren't so important here. What matters is the main point." "I don't have any crayons," Ursula said. "They must be somewhere. Red and yellow, that's all you need." Ursula asked a boy to go look for them. "It might make the books messy," she told Birkin, blushing. "Not too messy," he replied. "You need to mark these things clearly. It's the main point you want to show, not the personal impressions. What's important is the red spiky parts of the female flower, the dangling yellow male part, and the yellow pollen moving between them. Draw it like a child draws a face, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth with teeth like this. And he drew a simple picture on the blackboard. Just then, another person appeared at the door. It was Hermione Rawdice. Birkin went to open the door for her. "I saw your car," she said to him. "Do you mind if I come in to see you while you're working?" She looked at him closely, with a playful intimacy, then let out a short laugh. Finally, she turned to Ursula, who, along with the class, had been watching the interaction between the two. "How are you, Miss Brangwen?" sang Hermione in her unique, almost teasing voice. "Do you mind if I come in?" Her gray, almost teasing eyes stayed on Ursula the whole time, as if trying to figure her out. "Oh no," said Ursula. "Are you sure?" Hermione asked again, with complete calmness and a bit of boldness. "Oh no, I really like it," laughed Ursula, feeling a bit excited and confused because Hermione seemed to be getting close to her, almost like they were friends, but how could they be? That was the response Hermione was looking for. She turned to Birkin, satisfied. "What are you teaching?" she asked, casually curious. "About catkins," he answered. "Really?" she said. "And what's interesting about them?" She spoke in a mocking, playful way, as if making fun of the whole thing. She picked up a twig with catkins, intrigued by Birkin's focus on it. She looked odd in the classroom, wearing a big, old cloak made of greenish cloth with a dull gold pattern. The collar and inside of the cloak were lined with dark fur. Underneath, she wore a fine lavender-colored dress with fur trim, and her hat was snug, made of fur and the same dull green and gold fabric. She was tall and strange, like she stepped out of a strange painting. "Do you know the little red flowers that produce nuts?" he asked her, getting closer and pointing them out on the twig she held. "No," she replied. "What are they?" "Those are the flowers that make seeds, and the long catkins only make pollen to fertilize them." "Oh, really?" Hermione said, looking closely. "Those little red bits turn into nuts if they get pollen from the long ones," he explained. "Little red flames, little red flames," Hermione whispered to herself. She stared at the small buds from which the red stigma flickered for a while. "Aren't they beautiful?" "I think they're so pretty," she said, getting closer to Birkin and pointing to the red filaments with her long, white finger. "Did you never notice them before?" he asked. "No, never," she replied. "And now you'll always see them," he said. "Now I'll always see them," she repeated. "Thank you for showing me. I think they're so beautiful, little red flames." Her focus was strange, almost dreamy. Both Birkin and Ursula were captivated. The little red flowers seemed to have some strange, almost mystical attraction for her. The lesson ended, the books were packed away, and finally, the class was dismissed. Yet, Hermione still sat at the table, chin in hand, elbow on the table, her long white face propped up, not paying attention to anything. Birkin had gone to the window, looking out from the brightly lit room to the gray, colorless outside where rain was falling silently. Ursula tidied her things in the cupboard. Eventually, Hermione stood up and approached her. "Your sister's back home?" she asked. "Yes," replied Ursula. "And does she like being back in Beldover?" "No," said Ursula. "I'm surprised she can bear it. It takes all my strength to endure the ugliness of this area when I'm here. Won't you come and visit me? Won't you and your sister come stay at Brettleby for a few days? Please do." "Thank you very much," said Ursula. "Then I'll send you a letter," said Hermione. "Do you think your sister will come? I'd be so happy. I think she's amazing. Some of her work is truly remarkable. I have 2 wood carvings of water wagtails, painted as well. Maybe you've seen them?" "No," said Ursula. "I think they're absolutely marvelous, like a burst of instinct." "Her little carvings are unusual," said Ursula. "Absolutely beautiful, full of primal passion. Isn't it strange that she always prefers small things? She always likes to work on small pieces that fit in one's hands, birds and tiny animals. She enjoys looking at the world through the wrong end of opera glasses. Why do you think that is?" Hermione looked down at Ursula with a long, detached gaze that intrigued the younger woman. "Yes," said Hermione eventually. "It's curious. The little things seem more nuanced to her." "But are they really? Is a mouse more nuanced than a lion, do you think?" Once again, Hermione regarded Ursula with that lengthy scrutiny, as if she were lost in her own thoughts and barely listening to the other's words. "I'm not sure," she replied. "Rupert, Rupert," she called gently, beckoning him over. He approached silently. "Are small things more nuanced than big things?" she asked, with a playful laugh in her voice, as if teasing him with the question. "Dunno," he said. "I dislike subtleties," Ursula interjected. Hermione looked at her slowly. "Do you?" she said. "I always think they show weakness," Ursula retorted, feeling defensive, as if her status were being challenged. Hermione paid no attention. Suddenly, her face wrinkled, her forehead creased with thought, as if she were struggling to articulate something troublesome. "Do you truly believe, Rupert?" she asked, as if Ursula weren't there. "Do you truly believe it's worthwhile? Do you think the children are better off being awakened to awareness?" A shadow passed over his face, a silent rage. He looked hollow-cheeked and pale, almost otherworldly, and the woman, with her weighty, conscience-probing question, tormented him deeply. "They aren't awakened to awareness," he replied. "Awareness comes to them, whether they like it or not. But do you think they benefit from having it heightened, encouraged? Wouldn't it be better for them to remain unaware of the hazel, to see things as a whole, without all this dissecting, all this knowledge? Would you prefer, for yourself, to know or not know that the little red flowers are there, attracting pollen?" he asked harshly. His voice was harsh, scornful, and cruel. Hermione remained with her face raised, lost in thought. He hung in silence, irritated. I'm not sure, she answered, weighing her words carefully. I'm not sure. But knowing is everything to you. It's your whole life, he burst out. She looked at him slowly. Is it? She said. To know, that's all there is for you. That's your whole life. You have only this understanding, he exclaimed. There's only one tree. There's only one fruit in your mouth. Again, she was silent for a while. Is there? She said eventually, with the same unchanged calmness. Then, with a touch of curious playfulness, she asked, What fruit, Rupert? The eternal apple, he replied, frustrated by his own metaphors. Yes, she agreed. There was a tired look about her. They sat in silence for a few moments. Then, with a sudden tense movement, Hermione continued in a casual, sing-song voice. But putting me aside, Rupert, do you think the children are better, richer, happier because of all this understanding? Do you really think they are? Or is it better to leave them untouched, spontaneous? Wouldn't they be better off as animals, simple animals, raw, aggressive, anything, rather than this self-awareness, this inability to be spontaneous? They thought she had finished, but with a strange rumbling in her throat, she resumed, Wouldn't they be better off as anything than growing up crippled in their souls, crippled in their emotions, so withdrawn, so turned in on themselves, incapable? Hermione clenched her fist as if in a trance, of any spontaneous action, always calculated, always burdened with choice, never carried away. Once more, they thought she had finished. But just as he was about to respond, she continued her strange outburst, never carried away, out of themselves, always conscious, always self-conscious, always aware of themselves. Isn't anything better than this? Better to be animals, mere animals with no mind at all, than this emptiness. But do you think it's knowledge that makes us lifeless and self-conscious? He asked, annoyed. She opened her eyes and gazed at him slowly. Yes, she said. She paused, still looking at him, her eyes distant. Then she wiped her fingers across her forehead with a vague tiredness. It irritated him deeply. It's the mind, she said, and that's death. She slowly lifted her eyes to him. Isn't the mind, she said, her body tensing, isn't it our death? Doesn't it destroy all our spontaneity, all our instincts? Aren't the young people growing up today really dead before they have a chance to live? Not because they have too much mind, but too little, he said harshly. Are you sure? She exclaimed. It seems to me the opposite. They are overly conscious, burdened to the point of death with awareness, trapped within a limited, false set of ideas, he argued. But she paid no attention to this, continuing her own passionate questioning. When we have knowledge, don't we lose everything but knowledge? She asked sadly. If I know about the flower, don't I lose the flower and have only the knowledge? Aren't we trading substance for shadow, forfeiting life for this dead quality of knowledge? And what does it mean to me, after all? What does all this knowing mean to me? It means nothing. You're just playing with words, he said. Knowledge means everything to you. Even your animalism. You want it in your head. You don't want to be an animal. You want to analyze your own animal functions to derive mental pleasure from them. It's all purely secondary and more decadent than the most rigid intellectualism. What is it but the worst and final form of intellectualism, this desire of yours for passion and animal instincts? Passion and instincts, you want them strongly enough, but filtered through your mind, in your consciousness. It all happens in your head, under that skull of yours. Yet you refuse to acknowledge what truly exists. You prefer the falsehood that matches the rest of your beliefs. Hermione hardened herself, poisoned by this verbal assault. Ursula stood, feeling a mix of wonder and shame. It frightened her to witness their intense mutual dislike. "It's all that Lady of Shalott nonsense," he said, his voice firm and distant. He seemed to be accusing her before an unseen audience. "You have that mirror, your own unyielding will, your immortal intellect, your tightly controlled world, and there is nothing beyond it. In that mirror, you must possess everything. But now that you've reached your conclusions, you want to regress and live like a primitive, without knowledge. You desire a life of pure sensation and passion." He emphasized the last word mockingly against her. She sat, consumed by fury and violation, speechless, like a prophetess of the Greek oracle in distress. "But your passion is a falsehood," he continued vehemently. "It's not passion at all, it's your will. It's your domineering will. You want to grasp things and hold them under your control. You desire power over things. And why? Because you lack a real body, any deep sensual connection to life. You have no sensuality. You only possess your will, your self-important consciousness, and your desire for dominance, for knowledge." He looked at her with a mixture of hatred and contempt, also feeling pained because she suffered, and ashamed because he knew he was causing her pain. He had an urge to kneel and beg for forgiveness, but a fiercer, angrier emotion burned within him. He became unaware of her presence, only a passionate voice speaking out. "Spontaneous," he exclaimed. "You and spontaneity. You, the most calculated being that ever existed. You would be deliberately spontaneous, that's you. Because you want to control everything with your own will, your intentional voluntary consciousness. You want it all confined within that repulsive little skull of yours, which ought to be cracked open like a nut. You'll remain the same until it is cracked, like an insect trapped in its shell. If someone cracked your skull, perhaps they might unleash a spontaneous, passionate woman from you, with genuine sensuality. As it is, what you crave is voyeurism, watching yourself in mirrors, observing your naked animal actions in mirrors, so that you can experience it all in your consciousness, make it all mental." There was a feeling of violation in the air, as if too much had been revealed, the unforgivable. Yet Ursula was now focused only on resolving her own dilemmas. In light of his words, she looked pale and distant. "But do you truly desire sensuality?" she asked, perplexed. Birkin gazed at her, becoming absorbed in his explanation. "Yes," he said, "that and nothing else at this moment. It is a realization, the profound dark understanding that you can't grasp in your head, the deep involuntary essence. It is a loss of self, but it is the emergence of another." "But how? How can you possess knowledge not in your head?" she inquired, struggling to comprehend his words. "In the blood," he replied. "When the mind and the known world are submerged in darkness, everything must be purged. There must be the flood. Then you discover yourself as a tangible entity of darkness, a demon." "But why should I become a demon?" she asked. "Woman wailing for her demon lover," he quoted. "Why, I don't know." Hermione stirred as if waking from death, obliteration. "He is such a dreadful Satanist, isn't he?" she drawled to Ursula in a strange resonant voice, ending with a shrill laugh of pure mockery. The two women ridiculed him, mocking him into insignificance. Hermione's shrill, triumphant laughter mocked him as though he were devoid of gender. "No," he said. "You are the true devil who refuses to let life thrive." She gave him a long, slow look, malevolent and disdainful. "You seem to know all about it," she said, with slow, cold, sly mockery. "Enough?" he replied, his face becoming firm and clear like steel. A terrible despair, along with a sense of freedom, washed over Hermione. She turned to Ursula with friendly closeness. "You are certain you will come to Brettleby?" she asked, urging. "Yes, I would very much like to," replied Ursula. Hermione looked down at her, pleased and contemplative, yet strangely absent, as if possessed, as if not entirely present. "I'm so glad," she said, gathering herself. "Sometime in about a fortnight." "Yes? I will write to you here at the school, shall I?" "Yes." "And you'll be sure to come?" "Yes." "I shall be so glad. Goodbye." "Goodbye." Hermione extended her hand and met the gaze of the other woman. She regarded Ursula as an immediate competitor, and the realization oddly exhilarated her. Besides, she was departing. It always gave her a sense of power, of superiority, to leave others behind. Moreover, she was taking the man with her, even if only in hatred. Birkin stepped aside, appearing distant and unreal. But when it was his turn to say goodbye, he began to speak again. "There's a huge difference between experiencing the senses and the harmful mental indulgence our society engages in. In our nighttime, the lights are always on. We watch ourselves. We keep everything in our heads. You have to let go before you can truly understand sensual reality. You have to let go of your consciousness. It's necessary. You have to unlearn to exist before you can truly live." But we have such a high opinion of ourselves. That's the problem. We are so self-important, and yet so lacking in true pride. We have no real pride, just conceit, so consumed by our own inflated egos. We'd rather perish than let go of our self-righteous, self-opinionated self-will. There was silence in the room. Both women were unfriendly and resentful. He sounded as if he were delivering a speech. Hermione simply ignored him, standing with her shoulders hunched in dislike. Ursula watched him cautiously, not fully aware of what she was seeing. There was a great physical allure about him, a hidden richness that emanated from his thin frame and pale complexion like a silent voice, conveying a deeper understanding of him. It was in the curves of his features, his brows and chin, rich, exquisite curves, the powerful beauty of life itself. She couldn't quite articulate it, but there was a feeling of abundance and freedom. "But aren't we sensual enough without trying to be?" she asked, turning to him with a playful glint in her eyes, as if challenging him. Immediately, a quirky, captivating smile appeared in his eyes and brows, though his mouth remained stern. "No," he said, "we're not. We're too self-absorbed." "Surely it's not just about vanity," she protested. "That's precisely what it is." She was genuinely puzzled. "Don't you think people are most proud of their sensual abilities? That's why they're not truly sensual, just sensuous, which is different. They're always too aware of themselves, and they're so conceited that rather than freeing themselves and living from a different perspective, they'd—" "You must want your tea," Hermione interrupted, turning to Ursula with a kind smile. "You've been working all day." Birkin stopped abruptly. Ursula felt a wave of anger and disappointment. His expression hardened as he said goodbye, as if he no longer noticed her. They left. Ursula stood at the door for a moment, then turned off the lights. Sitting back down, she was lost in thought. Then, she began to cry, deeply and bitterly. Whether from sorrow or happiness, she couldn't say.